Well, welcome back again this week to Analysis Behind the News. I noticed this past week that John Kerry, Secretary of State, has called Snowden a traitor. Now, I have my own problems with Snowden. I think the jury is still out on the gentleman. There's some things that he's revealed that I think are going to be helpful for liberty in this country. But there are some other aspects that I don't want to spend this time getting into where I still have my doubts about the gentleman. Be that as it may, for Kerry to call Snowden a traitor is like the pot calling the kettle black. Because Kerry, in his life, in my estimation, has been a traitor. Because he went, first of all, in Yale, he became a member of Skull and Bones. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that organization, I invite you to Google it, Bing it, or whatever you want, and look up Skull and Bones at Yale and see some of the things that are out there on that organization. He's been a member of the Bilderberger. His wife is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And if you look at the list, the membership roster of the Council on Foreign Relations, she's listed under Teresa Heinz Kerry. She maintained her first married name when she got married the second time. So his wife, is a member of the CFR. Interestingly enough, his predecessor, Hillary Clinton, was never a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, but Bill Clinton's a member, and their daughter is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, what's the significance of this? Frankly, the CFR is an organization that stands for a new world order, a one world government, a one world court, abrogating the Constitution and independence of the United States into this world parliament. The thing is that there are a number of people like that in our own government who are pointing fingers at others like Snowden and such, who have a very checkered past. You know, Kerry went from Yale into the Navy, into Vietnam, got awarded a number of medals for valor. There is still some debate over within the individuals that served with him, as a matter of fact, of whether he deserved those medals or not. There is some evidence that those medals were given to him more for political means to further his career than they were for the valor that he supposedly received them. But at any rate, he comes home from Vietnam and gets involved in the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Now, there was a big anti-war movement in those days run by the Communist Party of the United States. Now, the average guy on the street, and the students that got involved, did not realize that this was a communist operation. But when you looked at all the organizations that were involved in the anti-war movement, the best thing you could say about their leadership was that they were part of the International Socialist cadre. Most of them were Trotskyites or Stalinists in the vernacular of what they were within the communist sphere. Whether or not Kerry falls into that, I have no clue. There was never any evidence of that, but he sure cooperated with all of these people. One of the things that he did at one point was to throw his medals across the fence that had been put up around the Capitol to keep the thousands of anti-war protesters from storming inside the building. Now, it came out that these were really not his medals. He said he was making a statement by returning the medals back to the government, but they weren't his. They were somebody else's. His medals have always been proudly hung in his office, either in the Senate, and I'm assuming now in the Secretary of State's office. But for him to be involved in things like that, where a lot of people believe that the anti-war movement was treasonous. Be that as it may, you can't really define it as treason if there was no declaration of war, and that's part of the problem with these resolutions that we get into war under their jurisdiction. They're United Nations resolutions. We certify them, pass our own resolution in support of this UN resolution, and get involved in the war. In Vietnam, it was through the UN regional organization called SEATO, and just like NATO, only in Southeast Asia. So technically, We weren't at war in the sense of declaring war by the Congress. So you can say, is it treason or isn't it treason? I believe that a lot of people would have been prosecuted for treason had we had a declaration of war in regards to Vietnam, instead of doing what we did through the auspices of the United Nations. So my point is this: Kerry calling Snowden a traitor is like the pot calling the kettle black. On another note, very interestingly this week, we see that the Soviet Union is apparently being put back together again. They don't call it that, they call it a economic union. Now that we see that the European Union is being put together, and the various treaties that they're trying to create with free trade zones and such, now Russia, Putin, has signed an agreement with Belarus and Kazakhstan to form a new Eurasian economic union. Some news reports refer to this as putting back the old USSR. And apparently that is where they're going. They're talking about bringing in Armenia and other states into it. For a time, the Ukraine was even part of the negotiations in this regard. And some Ukrainian leadership wanted to go with the EU, some wanted to go with this economic union being put together by Putin. But it's very interesting when you look at this. The Russian leader, Putin, said that the document brings Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus to a new level of integration, yet lets each individual state fully retain its sovereignty. Well, we know that's a lie. You cannot have this kind of economic integration and maintain your sovereignty. It's impossible, because you now are one vote within a larger structure. This is the problem with trade organizations that they're trying to get us involved with today, called free trade. We're only going to be one vote, and we cannot make unilateral decisions affecting our own economy, even things within the United States. But that's another subject. It says it's a large regional market that brings together more than 170 million people. It's a new geopolitical reality of the 21st century being born. Another one, it's a bridge between the growing economies of Europe and Asia. Further on, Kazakhstan plans to join by the end of 2014, and a decision on Armenia's membership will have to be made by July of this year. But the point is that they're putting back this new, not new, they're revitalizing the old Soviet Union. They're starting to legalize it. If you remember, I mentioned last week that they may not have it legalized in all of this conspiracy of the communist parties behind the scenes relative to all these former USSR states. But now they're starting to legalize it. They're starting to make it into a legal entity and not just use the Communist Party to control these things. Now we see that Russia and China may create a common economic zone, meaning a free trade area, so to speak. And once they get these things together, then they will merge them all into a new world order. That's the whole point. And it's very interesting that they're starting to use words now that are trying to get us thinking along a certain way, away from sovereignty. All of a sudden we're starting to see the term used, the economic zone. For instance, I read an article this week that said that the Soviet Union, the Russians' new aircraft carrier had violated the Netherlands economic zone. What they mean is it got into the Netherlands waters, their sovereign waters. And now they're referring to it as an economic zone. So every time they can get us thinking using these new semantical terms and thinking in those terms, we get a step away from the original idea of sovereignty. We're going from sovereignty now to our economic zone. Well, if it's only an economic zone, there isn't any territorial aspect to it in the sense that we once had in protecting our sovereignty. So they're trying to manipulate it slowly but surely by substituting new semantical terms that get us away from thinking in terms of independence, sovereignty, and that sort of thing. Be very careful about it. And this is coming, by the way, straight from Russia, because this information I'm bringing you right now is from Russia Today, or RT, which is controlled by the Russian government. So look for those things in the future. Until next week, we'll see you then.